Hello, good morning, and welcome to the show. My name is Makiza Latifa, and I'm happy to see you once again. This is China Now. Let's get straight into our lineup for today. And we're starting with our weekly news report of what's happening in China, as presented by our usual host, Chris. Well, there's so much in the news on China currents today. On March 16th, Chinese scholars unveiled a preliminary proposal draft in Beijing that could potentially shape the nation's forthcoming artificial intelligence law. There's also some unfortunate news of the brutal bullying and murder of a 13-year-old boy in North China's Henan province, which has triggered a profound reflection on juvenile crime in Chinese society over the past few days. Stick and stay with us for all the details.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to China Currents. I'm Chris. On March 19th, Hong Kong lawmakers unanimously passed the highly anticipated bill mandated by Article 23 of Basic Law of Hong Kong, following marathon sessions during which all lawmakers expressed their strong support for the law, which was first proposed more than 20 years ago. It is expected to play a crucial role in addressing the city's national security loopholes, forming a solid national security shield with the national security law for Hong Kong by preventing the US-led West's subversion, infiltration, incitement, and espionage activities in the city. The bill will be gazetted on Saturday and will take effect from then. The law enables Hong Kong to effectively prevent, suppress, and punish espionage activities, conspiracies, and traps from foreign intelligence agencies, and infiltration and sabotage by hostile forces. John Lee, Hong Kong's chief executive, mentioned that through the new law, Hong Kong can effectively prevent black-clad violence, color revolution, Hong Kong independence, and violent destruction. Next up, diplomacy. Visiting Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with New Zealand Prime Minister and Foreign Minister on Monday, March 18th, where he acknowledged that both sides have set many first records, making bilateral relations always at the forefront of China's relations with developed countries and becoming a valuable asset for both sides to cherish and carry forward. Wang said during his meetings with New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon that China regards New Zealand as a rational and mature cooperative partner, and China-New Zealand relations are of a strategic and long-term nature, according to the statement published by Chinese Foreign Ministry. Wang stated, "We are ready to take the opportunity of celebrating the 10th anniversary of our comprehensive strategic partnership with New Zealand to transcend new benchmarks, upgrade our comprehensive strategic partnership, and build relations between countries that are harmonious but different, so as to benefit our two peoples and make new contributions to world peace and development." On March 20th, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong in Canberra that since the relationship between China and Australia is on the right track, we should not hesitate, deviate, or backtrack, and development of the bilateral ties is not targeted at any third party, nor should it be influenced or interfered with by any third party. The Chinese Foreign Minister said, "This is an important year that carries on the past and opens up the future. Building on the good momentum of bilateral relations so far, and both China and Australia should work together to create the future, and with a more proactive attitude, jointly build a more mature, stable, and fruitful comprehensive strategic partnership." Next up, technology. On March 20th, China successfully launched into preset orbit the Queqiao-2 relay communication satellite, as well as the Tiandu-1, Tiandu-2 communication and navigation technology experiment satellites. The key constellations supporting the country's subsequent Chang'e lunar exploration missions, as well as international exploration programs. Carrying the three satellites, a Long March 8 rocket took off from Wenchang Space Launch Site in South China's Hainan province at around 8:31 a.m. on March 20th. And after a flight of 24 minutes, the Queqiao-2 satellite separated from the carrier rocket, and then its solar wings and communication antennas unfolded normally, marking a complete success of the launch mission, according to the China National Space Administration. Queqiao-2, or Magpie Bridge 2, is a relay satellite for communications between the far side of the Moon and the Earth. The satellite will serve as a relay platform for the fourth phase of China's lunar exploration program, providing communication services for Chang'e 4, Chang'e 6, and Chang'e 7 and Long March 8 missions. Next up, on March 18th, Chinese President Xi Jinping congratulated Vladimir Putin on his re-election as Russian president. As Putin has addressed his supporters and declared his re-election victory earlier on the same day following the victory of presidential election with over 87% of the vote in his favor. Chinese analysts said that several major powers will hold elections this year, and Russia's presidential election result has provided certainty to a world in turbulence, as Putin's victory proves that Russian people widely support his governance and Russia's policies and stances over key issues like the Ukraine crisis and its relations with other major powers will unlikely undergo dramatic changes. Putin's re-election will bring certainty to the future development of China-Russia relations, as the consensus reached by the top leaders of the two countries will be implemented and further promoted, according to the experts, adding that China maintains its objective stance on the Ukraine crisis and will continue its efforts to help relevant parties to find solutions for political settlement. Next up, the brutal bullying and murder of a 13-year-old boy in North China's Handan has triggered a profound reflection on juvenile crime in Chinese society over the past few days, with many calling for a more effective way to keep teenagers from veering onto the wrong path. According to media reports, 7th grade boy Xiao Guang was killed and buried on March 10th by 3 of his classmates of the same age in Handan, North China's Hebei province. So far, all suspects have been captured and taken into custody, the joint working groups responsible for the case said on Sunday night. An autopsy was conducted on the body in the early hours of Monday. Relatives of Xiao Guang told media that Xiao Guang's father examined his child prior to the autopsy and saw clear injuries on the boy's head and back. The Beijing News reported on Monday. Xiao Guang has suffered from long-term school violence, previous media reports said. Experts on Monday said the murder could become the first case nationwide that applies a new provision under the criminal law amendment, thus serving as an alarm bell to warn and educate other potential offenders. The root cause of youth crime lies in the lack of family education and school supervision, with many cases involving left-behind children, they noted. Next up, in another patrol, China Coast Guard vessels sailed in the waters near Kinmen Islands on the last Friday and Saturday, a move experts said is intended to signal that Chinese mainland law enforcement vessels will conduct more patrols in the waters to protect lives and safeguard the legitimate rights of fishermen from both mainland and Taiwan region. Analysts from both sides of Taiwan Strait said that due to the February 14th fatal boat incident and the poor handling and negative attitude of the secessionist Democratic Progressive Party authorities, the Chinese mainland will likely take more actions to protect the people, and the DPP will face a bitter situation that was provoked by itself. According to the CCG, its Fujian province branch sent vessels to conduct law enforcement patrols in the waters near Kinmen on Friday and Saturday. The Coast Guard claimed that the move aims to safeguard the legitimate rights and safety of life and property for Chinese fishermen, including those from Taiwan region. It said the CCG will keep strengthening its law enforcement patrols and inspections. Next up, on March 16th, Chinese scholars unveiled a preliminary proposal draft in Beijing that could potentially shape the nation's forthcoming artificial intelligence law. The proposal draft pays attention to the development issues of industrial practices in 3 areas of data, computing power, and algorithms, Zhao Jingwu, an associate professor from Beihang University Law School, told the media. Zhao said that the proposal also introduces the AI insurance system that encourages the intervention of the insurance market through policy incentives, exploring insurance products suitable for the AI industry. In addition, it proposes an enhancement of citizens' digital literacy, aiming to prevent and control the security risks of the technology from the user end. Next up, during Wednesday's routine press conference, when asked to comment on Blinken's remark during the Summit for Democracy on Monday accusing China of spreading false information, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said that China strongly opposes and is firmly against the remarks, and has made solemn representations to the US side. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken's accusing China of spreading false information is in itself false information, said Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian on Wednesday. Democracy versus authoritarianism hyped up at the so-called Summit for Democracy is a false narrative, while accusing China of spreading disinformation itself is disinformation, Lin noted. He said that the US is the world's biggest source and spreader of disinformation, and the world sees this clearly. Last but not least, a group of landing ships of the Chinese People's Liberation Army recently held live-fire exercises in the South China Sea, with analysts saying on Sunday that flexible vessels capable of carrying tanks in amphibious landing missions are important in the safeguarding of China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights. The plans Danxiashan, the plans Dayunshan, and the plans Wanyangshan recently formed a task force and conducted multi-course realistic combat exercises in an undisclosed area in the South China Sea, China Central Television reported on Sunday. According to the report and publicly available information, the plans Danxiashan is a Type 072 third tank landing ship, while the plans Dayunshan and plans Wanyangshan are Type 072A tank landing ships. During the drills, the vessels undertook training courses including live-fire shooting against sea mine targets and side-by-side mooring. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts and comments about our show, please reach us at the email address below. I'm Chris, looking forward to hearing from you, and see you next time.
Thank you, Chris. Next on the show is Threshold with Lisa, where we bring you technology-related news and scientific discoveries that have the probability to change our future. Today, Lisa will talk about the China-US tech war, which has finally extended to the realm of biology, and then also the race to the moon, as China has taken significant strides despite experiencing a recent setback. Over to you, Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa, and this is Threshold in China. Today we are going to share some exciting tech innovations and announcements that happened in China recently. In humanity's new race to the moon, China has taken significant stride while also experiencing a recent setback. On the 21st of March, China successfully launched the Queqiao-2 relay satellites using the Long March 8 rocket from the Wenchang Satellite Launch Center. This satellite plays a crucial role in maintaining communication with the far side of the moon, which is always facing away from the Earth. This will allow continuous coverage for up to 8 hours during critical missions. The first mission to benefit from Queqiao-2 will be the Chang'e 6 mission in May, which aims to return samples from the far side of the moon. But the satellite capabilities extend beyond that, supporting planned missions to establish a prototype lunar base at the South Pole by 2028 and potentially assisting spacecraft from international partners. Queqiao-2's predecessor, the original Queqiao relay, has been instrumental in maintaining contact with the Chang'e 4 lander and Yutu-2 rover on the far side since 2019. With an extended lifespan at least 9 years, Queqiao-2 will significantly enhance China's capabilities for lunar exploration and potential crew missions in the decades ahead. The launch also carried 2 experimental satellites, Tiandu-1 and Tiandu-2, which will test lunar navigation and communication technologies. These satellites will orbit the moon and validate important systems for China's future Queqiao constellation, which is a network of navigation and communication satellites around the moon. However, China recently experienced a rare miss in its lunar program. Just before the Queqiao-2 launch, a pair of test satellites, DRO-A and DRO-B, failed to reach their intended distant retrograde orbit due to an issue with the rocket's upper stage. From DRO orbits, they were supposed to travel in formation with DRO-L, another satellite successfully launched into low Earth orbit in February, and test laser-based navigation technology between Earth and the Moon. At the same time, other countries like the United States and Japan have also encountered launch problems recently. SpaceX Starship upper stage vehicle lost contact and burned up during atmospheric re-entry. Japanese Callisto, a small solid rocket, exploded just 5 seconds after liftoff. This reminds us of the immense risk and challenges still inherent in space exploration, even nearly 70 years after humans first ventured into space. The China-US tech war has finally extended to the realm of biology. On February 28, Joe Biden signed an executive order that restricts researchers from certain countries like China from accessing and using sensitive data in the United States, particularly personal health data and human genome data. The impact of this order is still unclear, and so are which databases will be restricted. However, given the current difficulties in renewing the China-US Science and Technology Cooperation Agreement, it could potentially worsen the ongoing decoupling between China and the US in the field of technology. In the worst-case scenario, China's life science research could be significantly affected if it loses access to databases such as PubMed, UK Biotank, TCGA, and GEO. And even if Chinese scholars can somehow access these databases, their studies, those that use those data, may not be accepted in Western academic publications. It has happened before, like the situation with MATLAB, a program that analyzes data. Chinese institutions are not allowed to use it or publish data obtained from it, because top academic journals are still controlled by Western publishing groups. And this is not a problem that only China is dealing with. In 2013, the US Congress passed legislation prohibiting US editors and editorial board members from receiving submissions from Iranian writers. And of course, US journals rejected all papers from Iran. However, the impact was so significant that European publishing companies also followed suit. On a positive note, this challenge presents an opportunity for China to accelerate the development of its own robust biological database. After all, the country has a big population of 1.4 billion people, which provides an enormous amount of biological data. In the biomedical sector, it has a vast volume of clinical data that can support industrial development. China has over 1 million medical and health institutions, which handles around 8 billion diagnoses and treatments annually. China has already established a National Genomics Science Data Center and initiated collaboration with various European and American databases. Many colleges have also created databases of various sorts. However, China's biological databases still lag behind those of Europe, America, and Japan in terms of infrastructure, data convergence and omissions, such alignments, and other factors. In any case, the road ahead is still long and challenging. We will keep a close eye on how the impact of this order will unfold over time. Over the past few years, we've witnessed a remarkable rise in large language models. These AI models have revolutionized how we interact with technology. However, this progress comes with a huge cost of energy consumption. A study shows that ChatGPT responds to about 200 million requests a day, consuming more than 500,000 kilowatt-hours of electricity. That is equivalent to the energy usage of 17,000 American households. Apart from electricity consumption, AI systems also require a large amount of water for cooling the computing equipment and are significant contributors to carbon emissions. Take GPT-3 as an example. This massive model with its 175 billion parameters needs around 700,000 liters of water to train in Microsoft's US data center. That's roughly the same amount of water needed to fill a nuclear reactor's cooling tower, or more than what 203,000 American households would use on a single day. It also releases 502 metric tons of carbon during training, comparable to the lifetime emission of 8 regular gasoline cars or 91 years of per capita carbon emissions. Elon Musk recently warned that the rapid growth of AI computing power could lead to electricity and transformer shortages as early as 2025. While Musk's prediction is taken with a grain of salt, his concerns highlight the urgent need to address the energy demand of AI. Researchers have been exploring ways to reduce the computational and memory requirements of these models. A group from the University of China's Academy of Science and Microsoft Research Asia has made a breakthrough with the Bitnet B 1.58 model. Unlike traditional large language models that employ 16-bit floating point values, Bitnet B 1.58 uses 10 real values of -1, 0, 1, resulting in a 1.58-bit model. Surprisingly, despite the reduced precision, this new model performs as well as full precision models with the same size and training tokens. Bitnet B 1.85 has several advantages. It uses integer addition instead of floating point operations, which saves a lot of energy and makes computations faster. It reduces memory usage, leading to faster loading time and lower cost for transferring models' parameters to specialized hardware. Introducing 1-bit large language model has far-reaching implications for the future of AI hardware and software. These models greatly reduce energy consumption and computational requirements, leading to more sustainable and accessible AI solutions. Other researchers are also trying to overturn the underlying logic of large language models and address limitations in computing power, especially against the backdrop of the US chip embargo. And that is all for today's Threshold. We hope you like this news section on science and technology in China. As usual, we welcome your feedback and thoughts.
And that's all for Threshold with Lisa. Hope you enjoyed it. Here's Charles Liu, a senior fellow at the Thai Institute, with our latest segment, Speak Softly with Charles.
Now, with U.S. Congress formulating legislation against TikTok, Donald Trump, now the known Republican presidential candidate, came out and decided to criticize this legislation, even though he himself was involved in blocking TikTok when he was president. Now, this is interesting. Why is it now okay to criticize the legislation and oppose it and support TikTok as it stands in the US market today? I think, of course, this is politics. It is just basically, number one, it's a show. With his election campaign, anything that the Democrats are in support of, and in this case, Biden is in support of this legislation, he will criticize it. He will make a show of it. The other part is, I think, TikTok has become really significant with 170 million users in the United States. It's become a significant political force. Mr. Trump has not been known as having had a lot of supporters among the youth, among the younger population. And this is where TikTok is strongest. So he may be able to pick up some supporters along these lines. But I think what's really significant here is actually, why is the US so united in terms of its government, in terms of its legislature, in terms of its politicians, so united in wanting to take over control of TikTok? I think just look at the valuation, and I will tell you, I think they're talking about forcing the owners of TikTok to sell their shares. And of course, will be sold to an American group. I think potentially there could be $300 to $400 billion worth of valuation differential. So I think those Wall Street forces and Silicon Valley forces are looking at this with a very keen eye, and then also prodding the legislature along in getting this done so they can take a piece of this really fat profit. I think we're really talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of this, the buyers having to pay and the actual market value of TikTok. So when you have $300-400 billion at stake, I think politicians can be persuaded to do things which they normally would not do. So I think there's a lot of monetary issue here. financial issues here. It's not just plain politics anymore, or ultimately politics is about money as well, in America especially.
Now let's head straight to the Thinkers Forum for our weekly dose of knowledge from our scholar for today in the person of Mr. Dee Knight, who is an editor and an anti-imperialist activist who will explain to us why socialism is gaining popularity in the United States of America.
Well, I'm Dee Knight. I live in New York City. I've lived here for about a little over 5 decades, and I've been involved in anti-imperialist movements here now for many years. It was the US war against Vietnam, that was the starting point for me. I was in university at the time, back in the 1960s, and was facing military conscription while also noticing a very large-scale movement for civil rights and Black liberation developing in the United States. I made a decision to refuse to be drafted to fight on the US side against Vietnam. Instead, I moved to Canada, where I became a leader among anti-war exiles. The result for me was to see the government of my own country as the enemy to resist and fight against. I realized this would be a long struggle and decided to dedicate my life to opposing the US war machine. I have witnessed the US war machine wage endless wars, all of which it has either lost decisively or failed to win. In the process, take, for example, in its war against Vietnam, they basically said they wanted to bomb Vietnam back to the Stone Age. And they used defoliant bombs like napalm, as well as what they called carpet bombing. And we also saw that our own soldiers, when they went there, they actually found that the Vietnamese Liberation Forces reached out to them as friends and said, look, if you don't fight us, we won't fight you. And that really happened. And it was the beginning of something that led to the end of the war. First of all, the American soldiers realized they could not beat the Vietnamese Liberation Forces. And they saw that they were being treated really horribly. And so they started to refuse to fight. And the combination of those two things led to a US defeat in Vietnam. Now, in each case, all of these wars, the public official reasons offered by US government leaders were lies. That the US was fighting for democracy or against terrorism or for human rights. In all these cases, the real reason was simply domination, a crazy mania to rule the world and control its wealth and resources. And in addition to the official lies about the purpose of its wars, the politicians and military leaders expressed racism and xenophobia against its chosen enemies, dehumanizing them and encouraging hatred of them. That was true in the US wars against Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, the former Yugoslavia, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Ukraine, and now in West Asia. Something that has stood out now, focusing on the US invasion of Iraq, is the story of Julian Assange, who is now facing extradition from England to the United States, where he is facing 175 years in prison, which is a death penalty, for exposing the crimes of the US in Vietnam. The crimes that he opposed, he captured on film that was given to him by a US Army intelligence soldier, Chelsea Manning. And it showed military people in helicopters making jokes as they identified so-called enemies on the ground, which included ordinary Iraqi people, as well as 3 reporters from Reuters. They shot them in cold blood, and that exposure led to a widespread scandal. And for that reason, Julian Assange is being prosecuted as a spy. So That's the kind of thing we saw there. Alongside the big lies about the purpose of the war machine's political and military leaders expressed false and arrogant superiority over its enemies and often came to believe its own fantasies that it was sure to win. But in fact, it has failed to win and has gradually isolated itself more and more. There have been leftist and progressive movements in the United States for a very long time. Most significant was the movement to abolish slavery, which emerged in the mid-19th century and has continued to the present day in many forms, most notably the Black liberation and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was very strongly affected by that when I was going to school at the San Francisco State University campus back in the mid-60s, when the Black Students Union was the most vocal student group on campus, and they educated me in many, many ways. And one of the real benefits to me was that I was able to see clearly the fact that the movement against racism and the movement against the war really should be seen as one thing. Now, also back in the late 19th century, the movement against U.S. imperialism arose very strongly during the so-called Spanish-American War, when the U.S. moved militarily to take over the fading control by Spain of its colonies in the Caribbean and East Asia, specifically Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Now, these two movements, the anti-racist movement and the anti-imperialist movement, grew as a new North American working class movement emerged again in the later part of the 19th century. At first, racism and anti-immigrant attitudes, especially anti-Chinese attitudes, crippled the working class movement here. But the formation of a communist movement at the end of World War I, which was a genuinely progressive and anti-racist working class movement, as it grew, especially during the 1930s, when U.S. capitalism had failed and large numbers of workers and progressive people responded to the possibility of socialism, that was the real launch of a major progressive left movement in our country. But following the end of World War II, as the United States emerged as the global winner of that war and launched a war against communist forces in both Europe and Asia, the U.S. government also launched an anti-communist crusade at home, determined to wipe out the progressive and socialist forces that had become strong during the war, and before the war. The result of this anti-communist crusade was that the left was largely crushed, at least temporarily. But the movement for civil rights of Black people surged forward during the 1950s and became the basis for a resurgence of progressive and leftist social movements, which grew stronger during the 1960s in fights for justice at home and against the U.S. war in Vietnam. These movements also responded to the surge of anti-colonial struggle across the global South at that time, taking inspiration from both the Vietnamese liberation struggle and the Chinese Revolution. But in the wake of the U.S. defeat in Vietnam, in the 1970s, the government launched another wave of repression, especially aimed at the Black liberation movement, in which many leaders of the Black Panther Party, among others, were either killed or incarcerated. I remember visiting the Black Panther Party headquarters in Oakland, California, just shortly after I returned to the United States from exile. And one of the most prominent things was the line of photos of many young leaders of the Black Panthers who had been killed by the police. The government also used mass incarceration through its so-called war on drugs to terrorize and immobilize the Black liberation and progressive movements. I became personally involved in efforts to revive the anti-war movement and the left following my return from exile in the mid-1970s. We built large-scale opposition and resistance to U.S. regime change wars in Central America. I actually went to Nicaragua for 3 years, really to help the Sandinistas there. We also built a strong movement against the U.S. government's support for apartheid in South Africa. Nelson Mandela was called a terrorist by Ronald Reagan back then. And of course, he emerged as a great hero of the African people. Then, as the US mounted its endless war campaign against the peoples of West Asia, we developed massive opposition to US invasions in Iraq and Afghanistan. But it wasn't enough, and the war machine seemed almost unstoppable during that period, really for the past several decades. But with the US proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, and now in response to its manic support of Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people, the progressive anti-imperialist and anti-racist movement in the US and elsewhere is being transformed massively. Interest in socialism has grown in the United States ever since the economic crisis of 2008, when people began to see clearly that the current system was flawed and failing. Various movements emerged. The Occupy Wall Street movement, in which people, especially young people, staged a sustained occupation not only of Wall Street, but of official power centers in various parts of the country. In some cases, notably in California and the Pacific Northwest, where I came from originally, this movement allied with labor union organizers and actually succeeded in shutting down ports in several locations temporarily. The new consciousness of this movement was reflected in the moderate socialist campaign for president of Bernie Sanders in the middle of the decade. That campaign led to mushrooming growth of the moderate Democratic Socialists of America, which grew to a membership of nearly 100,000. That's large by American standards. Then, in response to police murders of Black people in various places in the country, the Black Lives Matter movement emerged, with large multiracial protest actions happening continually in 2020. All of these factors combined with a growing sense of economic pessimism in the country, especially among the youth. There is widespread unemployment among young people and also middle-aged people, alongside deepening indebtedness because of oppressive and really unpayable loans for school, housing, and all the necessities of life. So far, in reality, these concerns have not crystallized in a coherent or unified left or socialist movement. The new level of intensity and massive size and level of unity of the anti-imperialist movement has to do both with the absolute crazy nature of the US government for domination everywhere, in Ukraine against Russia, in the Far East against China, suddenly making NATO a global phenomenon with incorporating the members. But most of all has been the inspiration caused by the Palestinian liberation movement and the outrage at the genocidal slaughter of the Palestinians. What it has done has been to expose the total hypocrisy of the US government leadership and the fact that it lies continuously, but that it does it while literally bombing the people of Gaza, a tiny strip of land in the Eastern Mediterranean, to help Israel wipe them out. The only problem is that the Palestinians refuse to give up. And they have really inspired millions of people, especially young people here, so that the chants you hear on the streets are free, free Palestine, from the river to the sea. Palestine must be free. And it's very interesting, it really harkens back to the era of the US war against Vietnam, when a whole generation rebelled against the government's effort to force us to go and fight against the Vietnamese, who were fighting really for independence and freedom. It's very interesting. In many ways, it's the same, but different because it's even bigger, which is really quite remarkable. And it's coming at a different time in the history of the United States. Then the United States was still the undisputed, most powerful country in the world. Now that's no longer true. And people can feel that. And they also can look to China and see that China has been able to win over a majority of countries in the world with no military action whatsoever, only with mutual cooperation for common prosperity and a shared future. This is a much better idea than what the US government is going for. And so very, very large numbers of people here in this country and also in other countries are rising up to stop the United States and its fascist partner, both in Israel and the Ukraine. It's something very new and very exciting and very hopeful. Well, there is certainly upsurge of interest in socialism in the United States. It has not come together as a coherent single force. It's the kind of thing that will happen first as unity in action, as the various forces find themselves together fighting for the same thing, organizing the same sectors of the population, going to the same actions.
Well, all too soon, we have come to the end of this episode of China Now. I hope you enjoyed every bit of it. We will come your way same time next week, but until then, do not forget to share with us your thoughts, comments, feedback, and suggestions through the email provided below. My name is Markiza Latifa. Thank you for your time.